The snow was already coming down sideways when Grandfather pulled that old newspaper off the stack by the back door. Not to read, to press flat against the wall. Every sheet, corner to corner, edges overlapping like scales on a fish, until the whole back bedroom was papered in yesterday's headlines. You remember watching him do it. You might not have known what it meant back then, but that man was engineering warmth out of nothing, using knowledge passed down through generations of people who could not afford to lose a single degree of heat. And here's the thing that would stun a room full of modern engineers. That trick works. Scientists have confirmed it works. The insulation value of compressed newspaper, the same principle used in today's commercial cellulose insulation, registers between R-3.1 and R-3.8 per inch. That's better than standard fiberglass. Grandfather knew. Today, we're exploring 25 forgotten blizzard survival tricks that Black grandfathers used, methods born in sharecropper cabins, refined in northern city kitchenettes, and proven by generations who had no margin for error. Let's start with something almost everyone in this community remembers. There was always a pot on the stove. Always. Didn't matter what time of day you walked through that door. Something was simmering. Beans, greens, a bone turning slowly in dark water, and the steam rose like a quiet blessing into the air. That was not an accident. That was trick number one. And it was genius hiding in plain sight, because that pot of water, that steady simmer, raised the humidity inside the house. And here is what the science tells us now. Raising indoor humidity from the bone-dry winter levels of 10 to 20% up to 40 or 45% makes a room feel 5 to 6 degrees warmer at the same actual temperature. The body stops losing heat through evaporation from your skin. The air softens, the cold retreats. Grandfather wasn't just cooking, he was controlling the climate with a $3 cast iron pot. Speaking of that pot, it was almost certainly a Lodge or a Griswold. Both companies had been forging cast iron since the 1890s. Lodge out of South Pittsburgh, Tennessee, founded in 1896, still running today. Griswold out of Erie, Pennsylvania, founded in 1865. Their pans stamped with a cross and a skillet logo that collectors now pay hundreds of dollars for. A number 8, Griswold skillet cost about 50 cents wholesale in 1902. 50 cents. And that skillet is still cooking in somebody's kitchen today, still holding heat the way cast iron does. 7.2 grams per cubic centimeter of dense, patient iron that absorbs warmth during cooking and radiates it back into the room for hours afterward. That's not cookware, that's a thermal battery. Modern aluminum pans lose heat the moment the burner goes off. That old black pan keeps giving. Grandfather knew. Now, let's talk about what happened the night before a big storm. If you grew up in one of these households, you remember the energy shifting in the house. Something deliberate moved through the rooms. The adults got quiet in a focused way. There was a kind of choreography to it, a practiced, purposeful calm that felt ancient even then. What was happening was preparation so thorough, it looked like ritual, because it was. The first thing was banking the fire. If the house had a wood stove, and in the rural South before the 1950s, most black homes did, the last act of the night before a storm was tending that fire with extraordinary care. The coals were raked into a tight, compact heap in the center of the firebox. Then ash, saved specifically for this purpose, was packed over and around them like a blanket, cutting off most of the air, not all the air, just enough to slow the burning down to the pace of breathing. A banked fire could hold its coals 8 to 12 hours. Come morning, you'd rake back the ash, drop a few pieces of kindling, and that fire would catch in minutes. The ash acted as insulation, the same principle as a Dutch oven buried in coals. If the fire died completely overnight in deep winter, you sent a child next door with a metal bucket to borrow coals from the neighbor. That was real. That happened. And that is how black communities understood fire, not as a convenience, but as a living thing that needed tending, that could be shared, that would not survive neglect. While the fire was being banked, the windows were being sealed, fabric scraps rolled into thick ropes, pressed along the bottom of every sash. Old newspapers folded into tight wedges, pushed into the gaps between frame and wall, and over the windows themselves, quilts, blankets, anything heavy, hung on nails or draped over rods. Windows and doors account for between 25 and 35% of total heat loss in a home, according to the U.S. Department of Energy. 25 to 35%. Hanging a quilt over a window can add a R-8 to R-10 of insulation value. And there was not 1 degree to spare, not one. Now here is something that will stop you mid-breath: the bricks. If you're old enough, or if your people are southern enough, you remember somebody's grandmother wrapping bricks in cloth and sliding them into the oven to heat. Old clay bricks from the yard, from the garden walk, from wherever they could be found. They went into the oven or set beside the stove for an hour. Then they were wrapped tightly in flannel or toweling and carried like sleeping infants to the foot of every bed. Children's beds first, then the elders. A first-person account describes it this way: the shivers would begin to slow and then stop as the warmth from the brick moved upward through the covers. That is not superstition, that is thermodynamics. Soapstone, the densest version of this practice, used as far back as Scandinavia in the 1600s, stores roughly twice as much heat per unit volume as cast iron or steel. A well-heated brick at the foot of your bed can hold significant warmth for 3 to 4 hours. Vermont Soapstone has sold handmade bed warmers continuously since the 1860s. The practice is that old, the science is that sound, and while the children were being tucked in with warm bricks at their feet, the layers came out. Not one thick coat thrown over the bed. That was wrong, and the old folks knew it was wrong, even if they couldn't explain why. Loose layers are multiple thin blankets with small pockets of air trapped between each one. Quilts stacked 3, 4 deep, each one made from a different scrap. A dress that wore out, a shirt that couldn't be mended again, a flour sack bleached clean and sewn into something that would outlast the flour by 40 years. The science behind layering is the science of air itself. Air has a thermal conductivity of just 0.025 watts per meter Kelvin, one of the best natural insulators that exists. Each layer captures a thin, still pocket of it. African American quilts from Gee's Bend, Alabama, a community of direct descendants of enslaved people, now hang in the Smithsonian and the Whitney Museum of American Art. Recognized as masterpieces, they were made by grandmothers who needed to keep their grandchildren alive through January. The beauty was incidental. The warmth was the point. Come morning in a blizzard house, there was a specific order of operations, and if you deviated from it, somebody's grandmother let you know. The first thing, before breakfast, before anything, was checking the pipes. Not with a tool, not with a thermometer. With your hand. You pressed your palm flat against the pipes under the sink and along the basement wall. Cold to the touch meant you had time. Too cold, the kind of cold that felt like the pipe was pulling heat directly out of your hand, meant you opened the faucet to a thin trickle. Running water doesn't freeze easily. That's physics. And that single act, one thin trickle of water in the kitchen and one in the bathroom, has saved more pipes, more ceilings, in more homes than any amount of pipe insulation ever sold at a hardware store. The cost, whatever a trickle of water costs, which in the 1950s was essentially nothing. Then came the Vaseline, before any child left that house, before school, before stepping onto the porch to shovel, before anything. The jar came out, the wide-mouthed jar, the one that sat on the bathroom shelf or the kitchen windowsill and was never more than an arm's reach away. Robert Chesbrough patented petroleum jelly in 1865. By 1870, he'd branded it Vaseline and was running a factory in Brooklyn. A 1-pound jar cost 29 cents in the 1940s. The American Academy of Dermatology now explicitly recommends petroleum jelly to protect exposed skin from wind and cold. It creates a barrier, hydrophobic, or semi-permeable, that prevents the wind from pulling moisture out of the skin. Black skin, with its specific lipid composition, was particularly vulnerable to ashiness and cracking in extreme cold and dry air. Vaseline wasn't a beauty product in those households, it was armor. And for families who couldn't spare the 29 cents, there was lard, the same hog fat used for baking, rendered and stored in a tin, rubbed onto hands, ears, lips, and faces before stepping out. A 2024 peer-reviewed study published in PMC confirmed that animal fat is biocompatible with human skin because its triglyceride composition mirrors the lipids found in the skin's own outer layer. They didn't know the word biocompatible, but they knew it worked. Let's talk about what kept people warm from the inside. Because the tricks these grandfathers knew weren't only about walls and windows and wool. They were about what went into the body too. Pot liquor. If you don't know that word, let me bring you home for a moment. Pot liquor is the dark, deeply flavored broth left in the cast iron pot after a long cook of collard greens or turnip greens with a ham hock, the kind of broth that smells like the whole house coming alive. For generations of black Southerners, enslaved people, sharecroppers, city families trying to stretch a dollar across a week, that liquid was not leftover. It was the main event. The Smithsonian Institution documents pot liquor as a vital nutritional resource, particularly for enslaved African Americans. Collard greens release into that broth more than 260% of the daily recommended value of vitamin K, iron, calcium, folate. In the winter, when fresh vegetables disappeared, a cup of pot liquor, dunked with cornbread in the old style, was preventive medicine. Senator Huey Long and President Franklin Roosevelt had a public argument in 1931 about whether you should dunk or crumble your cornbread into pot liquor. That tells you how central this food was to American life. And it was created by black hands from the parts of the hog the landowner didn't want. Bone broth from those same ham hocks, simmered 12 to 24 hours until the liquid was thick and golden, delivers roughly 10 grams of protein per cup, plus glycine and proline that support joint function and immune response. A study at the University of Nebraska Medical Center found that amino acids in chicken broth reduced inflammation in the respiratory system, more immediately relevant. A study on visceral thermoreceptors found that a hot drink during cold stress could stop shivering within 1 minute, not by raising core temperature, but by triggering the body's thermoreceptors to signal warmth. 1 cup of hot broth on a blizzard morning. That's what grandfather handed the children before they went outside. He did not know the science. He knew the result. And then there were the remedies. The ones kept in the back of the cabinet, in the unmarked jars, in the small cloth bags that smelled like something from another world entirely. Elderberry syrup, made from the dark purple berries of the sambucus tree, simmered with honey and sometimes ginger, strained through cloth into mason jars and stored on a cool shelf. In black households across the South and the urban North, this was the first line of defense when someone started coughing in a snowstorm. A 2004 randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trial published in the Journal of International Medical Research gave elderberry syrup to 60 influenza patients. The group taking elderberry recovered an average of 4 days faster than the placebo group. 4 days. A 2019 University of Sydney study confirmed that elderberry compounds directly inhibit viral entry and replication in human cells. A meta-analysis of 4 clinical trials found a large effect size of 1.717 with a pause value under 0.001. Grandmother made it in a pot on the same stove that banked the fire. She charged nothing. She asked nothing in return except that you took your tablespoon without making a face. The mustard plaster came out when the coughing went deeper. A tablespoon of dry mustard powder mixed into 3 or 4 tablespoons of flour, worked into a paste with warm water, spread on a clean cloth, cotton usually, worn soft by years of washing, and laid carefully on the chest, not directly on skin, always with a layer of cloth between. Left for 20 to 30 minutes, no longer, because the allyl isothiocyanate released by mustard was powerful enough to blister if you left it too long. That compound is a rubefacient. It draws blood to the surface, increases circulation, creates warmth from within, Modern counter-irritant medications operate on the same mechanism, and the azafoetida bag, the small red flannel pouch worn around the neck, while containing that brown, sulfurous resin that smelled like something between garlic and a dare, went back to the earliest African Americans. Victoria Adams, who had been enslaved in Columbia, South Carolina, recalled, "We dipped asafoetida in turpentine and hung it around our necks to keep off disease." During the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic, the United States Pharmacopoeia endorsed asafoetida as a remedy. In 2009, researchers found asafoetida compounds showed potency against H1N1 influenza in laboratory testing. The smell was so overwhelming, it may have enforced social distancing before the phrase existed. But here is the truth that all 25 of these tricks point toward, the one that the list itself can only gesture at, because none of these techniques, not the banked fire, not the brick at the foot of the bed, not the pot liquor, not the elderberry syrup, none of them worked alone. They worked because of a system, a web, a community that had been forged in the hardest possible conditions and had decided somewhere deep in its bones that no one would be left in the cold alone. The Free African Society, founded in Philadelphia in 1787 by Richard Allen and Absalom Jones, was the first black mutual aid society in America. By the 1800s, more than half of black Americans in most major cities belonged to at least one mutual aid organization. E.B. Du Bois documented enslaved people pooling money to purchase each other's freedom. After the Great Migration carried 6 million people north between 1910 and 1970, from the Mississippi Delta to Chicago, from the Carolinas to Detroit. Now from Georgia to Pittsburgh, those same mutual aid traditions moved with them. The Chicago Urban League organized block clubs specifically to help Southern migrants survive northern winters. By World War II, Chicago alone had 20,000 of them, and at the center of every block, in every neighborhood, there was the person the whole community called on. You know who she was. You might have called her Big Mama, or Mother Jones, or Miss So-and-so from down the street. She was the woman whose door was never fully closed, whose kitchen never fully stopped, who knew, without being told, when somebody on the block was struggling, when the heat had gone out, when the pipes had frozen, when there wasn't enough. She didn't post it anywhere. She didn't announce it. She just showed up at the door with a pot wrapped in dish towels, and still hot from the stove, and she set it on the table, and she didn't make a fuss about it. 2 pieces of fish and 5 loaves of bread somehow stretched to feed everyone who walked through that door. That wasn't magic. That was community as infrastructure, community as the most ancient and reliable heating system ever built. These 25 tricks have been mostly forgotten, not because they stopped working. The science says they work better than we realized. They've been forgotten because the circumstances that required them were so painful, so defined by poverty and exclusion and cold rooms in old buildings that no one wanted to maintain, that the generation who survived them didn't always want to pass the stories on. They wanted something better for their children, and they got it: central heating, insulated walls, thermostats with digital displays. They got it through sacrifice and labor and the migration that Isabel Wilkerson called the defining movement of 20th century America. But something left with the hardship, the knowledge that your neighbor's warmth was your business, that a big pot was always more than enough, that you could build something from nothing: warmth from newspaper, healing from berries, survival from community. If you understood that nothing was ever truly nothing, that the broth left in the pot was the most nourishing part, that the old brick could give heat long after the fire died, that the person who stayed warm was rarely the one with the most resources. It was the one who knew the most people. Grandfather knew all of this, and now so do you. Thank you so much for spending this time with us and taking this journey back through the wisdom that kept generations warm. If this brought something back for you, a memory, a face, a smell from a kitchen you thought you'd half forgotten, hit that like button. Share it with someone who remembers where they came from. And if you want to stay connected to more stories like this one, subscribe, because we're just getting started. We'll see you in the next one.